Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Devashishta, for the invitation to enrich the conference with some of the universal language. Some people argue that music isn't a language, but in my experience, it really has been. I've been able to look at it in that way, and maybe that's just where I'm at in my sadhana with it. But I grew up in the jazz tradition in Toronto, and I felt that one of the most important parts of developing myself as a musician into an artist was to really find who I am. Who am I, really? Not just following the greats around or, sounding like one person. You study so many different jazz legends. They all become gurus in a sense. But I came to a point where I really felt like I wanted to find who I was. And that brought me to India. And I went there just with the idea of gathering some new inspiration, some new resources to improvise with, to compose with, and that I got. But I got a lot more than that as well. I ended up wanting to go back for longer. And after that trip, I wanted to go back for longer, until I was in India for a couple of years at a time, and I lived in Calcutta, or outside Calcutta in Shantiniketan, for a period of 10 years. And so I went from a jazz musician who wanted to bring in worldly elements, and Indian elements into his jazz, to actually an Indian classical musician. And there was a whole other house that I had to build as a musician, as an artist. And that's the way that my guru described it. One day he came forward, said, I understand that you have this whole beautiful tradition, but it's not helping you right now. So I was thinking, well, music is a universal language. Why aren't the things that I had inside of me already as a competent, let's say, jazz musician, why wasn't it helping? And he said, I don't know, but good thing you live here. I'll sit with you every day, let's figure it out. So we did that, and I went through a pretty intensive talim, it's called, which is one-on-one training with the guru. I was also there with my brother for a long time. And the majority of my work was done with Shantanu Bhattacharyya, who's my guru, and he's a singer. And so I would take the singing class with him, and then I would go home and I'd try to play that on the saxophone. And then he asked me to bring my saxophone in, and I would play in front of him. And it was just like the old days. It doesn't happen like that too much anymore, where you have such a realized master who's willing to spend all that nitty and gritty time with you, because there was a lot of very slow, small steps forward or backwards, because it was an assimilation not only of a language. It was something that I had to culturally go through, and music became sadhana to me, a spiritual practice. And so over time, I felt that these two houses were sort of starting to complement each other. One house from my jazz side was there. I felt like I could tap into that if needed to, go into a creative space, improvise, play jazz tunes. And then there was this other side that was developing the routine, the discipline, the reorientation of tuning. Tuning systems are completely different. And just the thought process of what the Indian student had to grow up with. I already had a mature mind, and I could already play my instrument when I came to Indian music. But I didn't have to go through all of those years of very basic practice that develops your mind into logical progressions. I had different logical sequences that I was using. And that's what Guruji was saying. You need to be, basically you need to go through what a child would go through. You have to go from the beginning. And so after 5 years of living in India, I did that on this instrument. And there was no shortcuts, because when I came to this instrument, the esraj, I couldn't play it. I'd never played a stringed instrument in my life before. But there was some crazy feeling inside of me that when I played it, it was really connecting to something that it felt real. It wasn't just a whimsical desire, oh, I'd love to play all these instruments. I'd already gone through that.
What is it called?
Okay, so this instrument is called the esraj. Esraj. And it's more commonly seen in the smaller version, which is used to accompany vocal music. It has played a little bit of classical music in its history, but it's mostly a light classical accompaniment instrument. Its sister is called the dilruba, and they play that in the gurdwaras in the Sikh tradition. So it's quite commonly known in the west part of North India. Esraj is said to be from the soil of the Bengal, and it became very famous as accompanying Rabindra Shangi, which was Tagore's music of 5,000 songs. It's in the hearts of every Bengali person. Like we grew up singing the Beatles, they grew up singing Rabindra Shangi, and this sound of the esraj is with it. There was a maestro named Ranadir Roy who his uncle was the first to play classically on it, the smaller version. And so he decided in order to get to the really deep places that the ragas, the main ragas were going, he needed to redesign the instrument. And so he did that by himself. He went through 4 or 5 different prototypes. He was working with a maker in Calcutta, and he came up with this instrument. Not only that, but he also mastered the instrument and mastered the raga music. And he left this tradition for the world. And then he passed away when he was 46 years old. So the instrument didn't have a chance to really evolve in his hands into the community of raga music. So it's actually quite a rare instrument. There are 3 people that play it in India at a very, like a professional level. And I sort of jumped in with both feet. I happened to have the blessings to find another guru who was going to sit there through all the nitty-gritty, hard stuff, squeaking and squawking, years of doing these basic practices. And that's how I sort of have taken the other approach into the raga music, from the Indian perspective purely. So there's another house, you could say, that sort of developed inside of me. And all these houses are there as discipline, they're there as tradition, and they've all offered me something that's I couldn't have done without. And so tonight we're going to basically blur the lines between these houses consciously. This is the jazz musician consciousness. What I've understood as being a jazz musician is that you develop a new language, or you take influence, and then you blur the lines, and then you freely associate things, and you see how it comes out, and you give it all the integrity of your being. So I'm sitting here with people that I feel are going to become good friends, but John and Miles are great musicians, and we just met, basically. We've played together, and so we're going to explore this. We're going to explore how we blur these lines, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different influences in some ways, but we all have a lot of similar influences. Miles, he's studying with Aladdin Matthew, who's a great composer and also studied Indian classical music for 25 years with Pranath, and so there's going to be that influence that we were really working on together. And so I felt inspired to present a raga in its basic, like traditional and pure form. And we worked together, and then we brought John in on it, and I think we wanted to present that, but in a collective sense, with non-Indian classical instruments. So that's going to be the first component, and then we'll see where it goes after that. But without further ado, we'll start playing, because there's been a lot of talking already. And I mean, I've tried to keep up, but I felt, especially as things got a bit fiery and the talk of revolution. And, I mean, I just wanted to play. There was something beyond the words that I haven't learned.
We have 10 years apparently.
I haven't learned to articulate all those thoughts, and maybe they'll never be articulated in words, but I know how they associate vibration and music in me. So the one point, why are we doing this? I could have just sat up here and played a pure raga in its traditional form as well. But there's something about, and this came up, which is why I wanted to mention it, the idea of past tradition and how it can be the foundation of something, but how it can also create a very stagnation as well. If you are constantly looking back at what has happened, and as great as it may be, but the idea of how can you look back, how can you see those footprints, but look forward at it as well, and feel comfortable that there are footprints behind you. You've come from a tradition, it's there, you know, it's integral. And so that crystallization of big ideas or archetypes or, you know, these universal principles that I believe Coltrane was really trying to search for in his music, I found them in the ragas. There's something that's very penetrating and deep. So with that idea of this crystallization of something that's very real, something that can descend and change people and change the feeling of the room. We're going to try to do that with Raga Marwa. And a little bit about the raga is that there's different levels of how we learn the ragas in terms of their setting, like the cultural setting. And this is an interesting aspect. The Drupad music, which was set in the court of Akbar, and the legendary maestro Tansen. There's a lot of mythology, fables that all the Indian children grow up with. And this raga is, in one way, in its cultural setting of that period, is said to depict the war field itself. It's the clash of the swords. It's that type of vital energy. And there's been different ways of describing the feeling and the mood of the rags. Another one that Ali Akbar Khan Sahib said, how he described this rag is the sound of a rock crying. So that's maybe more of a contemporary perspective of what this rag has meant to him. There's a certain note in this rag that you will hear constantly, and my Guruji described it as the shield of Durga. And another way that I would work on the music and ragas with him is that we would talk about how they related to the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, and specifically Savitri. And so he said this rag to him was depicting Savitri's. She has descended, she has to save the world and save herself, and do it alone, basically. It's that burden or that fate, you could say, which when my Guruji was describing the imagery and the feeling of that became again a very overwhelming feeling, and then he started singing for 4 hours, and it became even more overwhelming, but it became very appropriate for that time and place. So with some of that background, I think we should just jump in. Yeah.
Are the lights okay for you guys, or is it too bright?
Yeah, I was reading it.
Too bright? Down? Do we have a...
Whatever you want. I would prefer lower.
Lower, yeah.
Yeah, we don't want you to be under fluorescent lights, because everybody closes
His
their
eyes were
No, it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah, all right, so we're going to continue on with some of John Coltrane's music. There's so many people, bands, and music that we could have, paid tribute to in a sense, or none of them, just being in the spirit of all of them. And I decided that I think that today is an appropriate day to pay tribute to Coltrane in a sense. 1968 was the year that we didn't have Coltrane. And there was a trajectory that Coltrane was going on, and that was into the Eastern religion, spirituality, mysticism, music. There's not a lot known specifically, other than a couple interviews and just a huge amount of recordings that bear names that directly reference Indian spirituality, Om, and Western as well, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. There's so much in the music itself, and so I sort of took it on myself in India to use Coltrane as a guru-like figure to help keep me focused in my creativity, my development of Western music. And so let's do a little bit of that. It was his birthday on the 23rd of September, which was also not too long ago. So, I grew up in Toronto going to see my two saxophone heroes, Pat LaBarbera and Kirk MacDonald, do a Coltrane tribute. 2 nights, I was there with my mini disc player. I'm that generation, Tape players, they were there, but mini disc was a new thing, from Japan. Pat was traveling with Elvin Jones, so he would come back from Japan with all this technology that we didn't yet have. So I got a mini disc player from Pat LaBarbera before most people knew. So I'd be up there bootlegging these concerts, going home and just living them and breathing them, and it was that's a beautiful part of my upbringing as a jazz musician. And so I think that we're going to play an arrangement of his based on Nature Boy, probably one of the most profound jazz tunes with lyrics that I really fell in love with a long time ago. And so I'm going to invite my wife Shayna to come and sing that with us after a short invocation by the trio, and then we'll continue on with a melody Coltrane wrote called Brasilia, and we'll end with an arrangement of mine based on After the Crescent. So some rare Coltrane stuff that you don't hear every day, I guess. You should. Okay, enjoy.
was he. Until one magic day, he came my way. Though he spoke of many things, this he said, to me. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love. And be loved. And be loved. And be loved. And be there was a boy, a very strange, strange, enchanted boy. And though he traveled very far, very far, over land and sea. and kings. This he said to me. The greatest thing, the greatest thing you'll ever learn, ever, 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 is just to love and be
So we literally could play all night.
Yeah.
Because we even practiced music to play all night. But I think we should get another gig here because we have more music to play that we won't play tonight. So
Let's do it.
next Saturday night? It's my pleasure to be able to bring this into my school here, CIIS, which I'm very happy and very inspired to be at. So it's great to see everybody here. And so to finish, we're finishing, right? Another 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to do something that I decided was really important to me, and that's invite a brother in music up, who is from Canada as well.
Yeah, Canada.
Please welcome Jake. He's actually a guru bhai of mine, meaning that he learned from the same guru. So he came to India in search of similar things, I guess, that I, as a jazz musician, was looking for. And we ended up living together for the last 2 winters in Kolkata. Well, he lived in Kolkata 2 years ago, and then we lived in Shantanu Bhattacharyya in a beautiful house in the countryside across from a nature reserve. And we would stand on the roof and play free jazz together, and the, you know, the cows and dogs would start howling, and the cows would moo, and the neighbors would clap sometimes. Sometimes they'd just look at us like we were strange white people, you know. Crazy. Yeah. But anyway, so let's please welcome Jacob, and we're going to Jake. Let's hear from Jon Arkin on the drums. Guru by a different guru, Wick. So I found that as I sat in India with all these beautiful structures and formalities and customs, whenever I'd come home to Canada, I would really want to just, like I said, blur the line and just freely associate everything that was sort of going on. And so Jake, you know, started bringing that out of me again, because for many years I wasn't interacting or playing or improvising with Westerners too much, because I was in India so much. So we're just going to improvise, and this is sort of like, for me, just, you know, at times what it's all about, what you need, you know. So let's just see what happens. But you know, let's just keep that that revolutionary vibration somewhere in there that we can, you know, trace back to the 60s and earlier. But let's see what happens. Thank you. Yeah, good work.
Thank you.